This is Brandy Brimhall with Chiropractic Compliance Solutions. I'm here to present to you a sample practice scenario to test your HIPAA policies and procedures. There are many types of scenarios that may occur in a practice, and when properly implemented and adhered to, HIPAA provides the foundation for workforce members to be able to minimize risk of incidents occurring, and it enables them to properly handle situations that do arise. While this sample scenario doesn't address all components of HIPAA, there are some key points in this scenario that must be considered. Be prepared to discuss this scenario with your team, review your pertinent policies and procedures, and make updates accordingly. So let's begin by reviewing this scenario. Sally is your office biller and is checking her company email. In the inbox, there's a message from one of your patients with a short statement that he's sending information over for review, followed by an attachment. Sally opens the attachment and immediately her computer system is severely disrupted. She instantly realizes that the patient's email was likely hacked, and now she has a virus. What should she do? So let's take a moment and pause and discuss this with your team. Make sure that you review your existing policies and procedures to determine if they help you appropriately address this situation and scenario. So now it's time to take a moment to pause and discuss this scenario. Make sure that you review your existing policies and procedures to determine if they help you to appropriately address this particular scenario. Now that you have discussed this with your team, I have some other tips and key points in here for you to consider. Is the antivirus up to date on the computer that Sally uses? Is it functioning properly? And is it able to detect and remove viruses properly? Should this instance require to be reported to the security officer for your office, or can Sally resolve the issue on her own? Does Sally or the security officer need to notify the patient to let him or her know that their email has been compromised? Is Sally's email possibly now compromised as well? And if so, what steps must she take to minimize the greater risk? It's also important to consider what protocol your practice has in place to possibly minimize the risk of a similar incident such as this happening in the future. Possibly you might need to notify team members who may also receive email from patients, particularly this patient, so that they don't open that email and also obtain a virus on their workstation. You should also consider factors such as if the email appears typical in general from that patient. And were you expecting information from that patient? Maybe you should have policy and procedure in place to contact the patient to confirm whether or not they sent the email or they're aware of the email before opening that attachment, if you're in doubt or if you're uncertain. You want to make sure that you're taking steps to be able to mitigate the situation and avoid it in the future. There are some additional tips to consider as you're discussing this and updating your policies and procedures. It's important to recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all compliance program or HIPAA program. There's also no way to predict and anticipate every type of possible incident, which is why HIPAA is important to have implemented in your office. Policies and procedures in place should define workforce member guidelines and their responsibilities, as well as protocol to help them best address varying types of scenarios. And this is, in general, the protocol that you would follow in order to address various types of scenarios. You must have policy and procedure in place to help your workforce members first detect, and then report, and then mitigate, and then implement steps for future prevention. So to go over this just in a little bit greater detail, to detect something is to determine if something has occurred and how to detect things as immediate as possible. Reporting it means reporting this to your office security officer or your office privacy officer. It's very important that you have the proper reporting steps in place so things aren't just handled or avoided and small mistakes or small incidents become much more significant and severe. Next is to mitigate, and this means how do you handle this and what steps do you take in order to make sure that this situation is minimized to the very least possible risk for your software, your patients, your EHR, and your workforce members. And then finally, steps for future prevention. So in this example, if an email was opened that was from a patient, perhaps you need to have policies and procedures in place to make sure that you're confident that the email is appropriate and is expected to be received by that patient. Or perhaps you have policies and procedures in place that if you receive attachments, that there's follow-up warranted in order to make sure that these attachments are legitimate. And the next step you want to make sure, again, to pause and discuss here. Make sure that you review and discuss those previous bullet points with your team and make sure the appropriate improvements to your policies and procedures are updated in those written documents that you have for HIPAA compliance. After reviewing this scenario and the bullet points, you may have found that your existing HIPAA policies and procedures need to be reviewed and updated. Or you may have determined that you don't have HIPAA implemented in your office and you need to make sure that that's a step that's taken in your practice and made a priority. To learn more about HIPAA training, there is an online HIPAA training, which is a HIPAA-only program available by Chiropractic Compliance Solutions. You can visit compliantchiro.com for more information on the HIPAA program. Note also that this isn't complete compliance. A lot of practices, when they think compliance, they think HIPAA only. But there's actually many more components to a comprehensive compliance program that is essential for practices. That comprehensive compliance program is also available by compliantchiro.com. If you visit that website, you can learn about both programs and to make a determination on which is going to be best for your office. The online compliance training program does include all of the HIPAA training in addition to all of the other required components of compliance. The HIPAA training contains HIPAA only and allows for practices to go through and make sure that they've implemented just those components of HIPAA. So take a look at those to see which is going to be best fitted for your practice. These lessons for both of these programs include short listen and learn lessons, which is easy to time manage. They're complete with the appropriate and editable policy and procedures, as well as necessary documents as they pertain to each lesson. There's also a slide at the end of each lesson that provides action steps for your practice so you know what steps you need to take next before moving on to the next lesson. Help desk support is also available, so you aren't alone as you have questions. You can just simply submit a help desk question and a person will get back to you with answers and information for you. Implementation with these programs can be very easily time managed regardless of your practice size. The HIPAA training program is a one-time purchase only, and there is no contracts required at all for chiropractic compliance solutions programs. So visit compliantchiro.com if you have additional questions or would like more information on these training programs.